Hello, and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Olivia Tuller, and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on August 4th with James Tanner. He will be giving a presentation entitled Using Your Smartphone for Genealogy, an update. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Byron Holdiman, who will be giving a presentation on oral histories. Before we begin, here is a little bit about Byron. Currently, Byron Holdiman is the Genealogy Librarian for the St. Tammany Parish Library System in Covington, Louisiana, and is a board member for the Illinois State Genealogical Society. He has also taught online genealogy research courses for Brigham Young University, Idaho. For 13 years, he worked on a grant from the Library of Congress helping teachers to use primary sources to engage their students. Part of this project included preparing students to conduct oral history interviews for inclusion with the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. If Byron is ready, we will turn the time over to him.
All right. Thank you, Olivia. So everyone has a story. And so what we want to do is be able to conduct an oral history interview to be able to capture this story. So a little introduction of my involvement with oral histories. Really started each week when I was in high school. I would go across the street to my grandmother's aunt's apartment from the high school, and I would talk to her about her life stories. And I thought it was very interesting that she grew up in horse and buggy times. And they even moved in horse and buggy from Missouri to Oklahoma. And so I love to hear these stories of what life was like for her back in the old days. The sad thing is I never recorded these. So I would visit regularly, hear these wonderful stories, got to BYU, took a genealogy class, and realized, this is really what I love doing. I really wish I had recorded those. And so that's one of the big pushes that I've made in that you need to record your family while they're here. Yeah, they can tell you these great stories, but if they're not recorded, you're going to forget them. So then at BYU, my last semester there, I took a class on conducting oral histories with Sister Jessie Embry. And I started out wanting to interview German immigrants to America who came over between World War I and World War II. Well, at this time, most of them were in their 90s. So I got to interview one. I had several others lined up, but I had a couple of them pass away on me before I interviewed. I had some others that their doctors said they didn't want them interviewed. So I went back to Sister Embry, and she got me started on doing an interview project that she was doing, which was interviewing sister missionaries that had gone out before, I think it was 1970. And so that was a great experience. And Sister Embry actually has published an article based upon that interview collection. And a couple of the interviews cited in that article are ones I conducted when I was at BYU. So now to move along, I started working on a project from the Library of Congress called Teaching with Primary Sources. And I worked on it for about 3 years at California University of Pennsylvania. Has nothing to do with the state of California, it's in the town of California. And then I worked for 10 more years on the project in Quincy, Illinois. And then just recently we moved from Quincy to come down here to Louisiana. But while I was in Pennsylvania, the director of the project there came to me, and this main purpose of this project is to help teachers supplement their textbook with historical documents and to engage students in the learning process of not just reading about it, but actually getting involved with primary sources. And so my director of the project came and said, you know, the library has this thing called the Veterans History Project. Do you think this is something we can get high school students involved in? I thought, well, I took a class at BYU. I loved it. It was a great experience. Yeah, let's go ahead and do this. So we put the call out to the schools that we were working with and let the teachers know, okay, we'd like to start this project. Who would like to be our guinea pig in getting this started? And we chose a school in Washington, Pennsylvania, just south of Pittsburgh. And one of her concerns, she had a high minority rate in her school. And she felt a lot of her students were going into the military because of the sign-up bonus that the military was given. And she didn't feel that they were prepared for what they were going into. So we chose to select that school. We went in on a weekly basis, trained the students in conducting oral histories, and they did their interviews. They were sent to us, and we processed and sent some of those to the Library of Congress to be included in the Veterans History Project. When I started this, I knew it would have an impact on the students, but the letters I got back from the students is really what was amazing. We had one student who wrote back and said that he did the interview only out of fear of failing the class. And he walked out of the interview with a new hero in his life, the veteran he interviewed. Another student stopped by our office and mentioned that she had interviewed her grandfather. And she said that at Christmas time, we made DVDs for each of them to give to their person that they interviewed. And she said at Christmas, her grandfather took that DVD and put it in the DVD player and had everybody gather together and watch it. And she said she was gathered with her whole family watching this. She realized she had a special connection with her grandfather that nobody else in the family had. And this is one thing, as I saw this take place, I saw that this intergenerational connection that was taking place, that the hearts of the children really were turning to the fathers, such as the one with her grandfather realizing that she had this special connection with her grandfather. So a lot of times when we talk about oral histories, you hear the old African proverb, when an old person dies, a library burns to the ground. And that's the one thing to realize, that all the memories, all the experiences that these people have, once they're gone, that's gone. And the library I just left at Quincy University, our dean there knows the story of how the friars brought these books that we have in the library that are from the 1400s. And the new librarian that has come in has started interviewing her about those stories, about those 1400 book years that the books came over from, and how they came to the United States, and how these books that are now 500, almost 600 years old have been preserved. She's not the only one that has a story. We all have stories to tell. And so we need to record those stories of our family members before those stories are gone. So the first thing in getting ready to conduct an oral history interview is, what is your purpose in the interview? What do you want to do? So when I was at BYU, I was working on my senior projects were on German American immigrants. And so I decided to try to interview German American immigrants. That didn't work out. So the next thing, I worked on a project from the Charles Rudd Center there at BYU on interviewing sister missionaries. So that was a purpose of the project. Your purpose could be just for genealogy, preserving your family stories, getting grandpa's information down. Or what I could have done when I was in high school, I could have recorded Aunt Susie and her stories. It could be veteran stories. The Veterans History Project is a great project to get involved with. And those stories are preserved in the Library of Congress, and the Library of Congress is going to make sure that those are preserved in a way that can be viewed later on down the road. Here at the library in Covington, Louisiana, we're doing a project right now of interviewing what it's like to have been living through the COVID pandemic. And these interviews could be important down the road. I know at the university, when the pandemic started, we had a lot of administrators come to the library to find out what the university did in 1918 with the influenza pandemic, to help prepare for what we were about to go through again. Could be a faith-based interview. People of various churches have started doing interviews to find out how faith is important in people's lives, especially as our culture is moving further and further away from faith. Those stories need to be captured. How is prayer getting you through hard times? How has faith helped you? How have you dealt with hard times when you've questioned your own faith? How do you move beyond the primary junior Sunday school answers to real life experiences? Once you've decided what type of project you want to do, if it's recording your family history, being involved in a local project, whatever you want to do, then you can start looking at who you want to interview. If this is a family interview, who are some of your older relatives that you need to capture their story? And the thing is, you really need to capture those now. I interviewed my father-in-law at Thanksgiving, and he was healthy at the time. We did not realize that by the next July, we were going to lose him. So it is very important. And I've had people who, like when I was going to interview the German American immigrants who are in their 90s, we lost some of them before I got to do an interview with them. And I've had people with veterans interviews that before they've got to interview their veteran, they've lost them. So that's something to look at, your older relatives, and schedule that right away. If you want to do something like the veterans interview, contact your VFW. So I went and spoke at VFW halls to get people interviewing. Ads were put out in the paper and we had people contact. My son did his Eagle Scout project with the Veterans History Project. And so he made an announcement at church, and we had several veterans at church that had him do interviews with them. Once you've decided who you're going to do an interview with, then the next step is to have a pre-interview meeting with them. Even if this is grandpa and you think you know grandpa really well, meet with them ahead of time. The Veterans History Project has a biographical data form Now, this here is specifically for veterans. But something like this might be a good thing to put together to get some basic information down. Could be even a family group sheet. And put information down about when people were born, when people were married, so that you could do some research. During this interview is when you're going to learn about them and learn about things that you're going to do further research into. Listen to their stories. It's going to help you develop questions. And we did have one that we had pre-interview with. He was living at the Illinois Veterans Home in Quincy. It was a fantastic pre-interview. Then when the teachers who participated in that met with him to actually do the interview, he was saying, well, I really wasn't that important. I really didn't do very much. And so the teachers then who were doing the interview were able to say, oh, well, you had mentioned this had happened in boot camp. Explain that. And then he explained, well, I think that's about it. I really don't have much to tell. Well, you'd mentioned you'd gone to D-Day. Tell us about D-Day. Then by the time he got involved telling about D-Day, he was into the interview and really gave a great interview. But if it wasn't for that pre-interview, those teachers who conducted the interview wouldn't have been able to push his interview and get the stories out that they did. I've seen a lot of them where they will bring pictures and memorabilia with them. My father-in-law, when I interviewed him, we came in the night before Thanksgiving and he had the entire table filled up with photo albums and memorabilia from the time that he was sharing with me. So that's something to pay attention to as well. Once you've had the pre-interview, then it's time to do some research so you have some background knowledge. And one thing I've seen with interviews that have been submitted that the person didn't do a little bit of background knowledge, their questions really were surface level and they didn't get into the real story of the person's life. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to do a thorough research on this. You're not doing research to write a book, but just enough research so that you can understand what their job was like, what were some activities they were involved with, so that you know some deeper questions to ask. And once you do that little bit of research and you have a little bit of that knowledge, then you can start asking questions that will get deeper and let the person tell their story. Then once you've done the research, now you can start developing your question bank. I want to point out that this is a question bank. This is not a checklist. We had one student who she had developed 6 questions and decided, okay, that will be good. And she said, decide the interview, if you submit it to the Library of Congress, it has to be at least 30 minutes long. And so she decided, okay, if my dad takes about 30 minutes with each question, or 5 minutes with each question, with 6 questions, that's going to be the 30 minutes. So that should be long enough. She realized 5 minutes into the interview, she had asked all 6 questions. So we had her come back and talk to other students that we were working with. One of the things that she had brought up that she had really learned is that you have to develop more questions. And she said that she would suggest going and developing develop a list of 100 questions. And one of the things that she commented, you may not ask all 100 questions, but you've already thought about these questions before the interview has taken place. And it's easier to come up with new questions that you've already thought of than to try to, on the spur of the moment, develop questions. When you're developing questions, keep away from just yes, no answers. If it's a question that they can just say yes or no to, you're not going to get much information. Plus the time they say, well, yeah. Now you have to come up with the next question. But if they're telling a story, why did you decide to enlist into the Marines? Then the person will tell why they decide to enlist in the Marines or whatever they were doing. And now, as you're listening to that, you may have questions about something they are talking about that you can develop a new question. So one of the things that we've done with this, working with students, is I will start playing like a 21 question game. But we don't limit it to 21 questions, we limit it to 1 minute. And for 1 minute, they have to, some event that has taken place or a person's hobby, and they have to try to figure out as much information as they can, but they can only ask yes, no questions. And then at 1 minute, we have them change places and they do the same thing. And then now we go back to the first person, and we do this and team them up. The first person, but now you have to ask open-ended questions. And now as they get the person talking, now we've given them 2 minutes, and at the 2 minutes, the big complaint is, that wasn't enough time. And so then we talk about how much different it was from using the yes, no questions to using the open-ended questions. And why is it important to use those open-ended questions? The one important thing, again, I want to stress is this is not a checklist. When you come up with your 100 questions, and you don't have to come up with those on your own. Family Search does have questions out there that you can use. The Veterans History Project has questions. There's lots of websites out there about oral history interviews that have lists of sample questions. So again, it's not just something you have to come up with on your own. Go out and use the resources that are out there. But remember, this is not a checklist. You're not going down a list. What you need to do is listen to the person you're interviewing and build upon what they want to talk about. You'll also develop questions during the interview. There may be things that you want to know more about that they're talking about that you did not write down in your questions. So what we've suggested with students that we worked with is that you have a notepad next to you. And when one of those questions come up, write that down. Because if you don't write it down, you're going to forget about it by the time the person you're interviewing pauses for you to ask another question. All right, so then before you actually do the interview, what are some pre-interview things that you need to do? One is check out the room while it is quiet. And this is a suggestion I really didn't think much about until it was brought up in a meeting that I was at just last month in Washington, D.C. at the Library of Congress about the Veterans History Project. And the director of the program commented that a lot of times, if you don't sit quietly in the room, you don't hear the noise that is going on that is picked up by the recording device. And she said it could be a clicking clock or traffic outside, or maybe a conversation that's going on next door. And so she said, just go to the room, sit down, close your eyes, and listen. And she said, sometimes when she's done that, She'll then listen, hear the traffic noise and realize, okay, that's going to be too bothersome. Or she could sit and listen and hear a conversation going on someplace. So she'll go in and let them know, okay, we're getting ready to interview and I can hear you, your conversation while we have the interview. Can you move the conversation elsewhere or try to be a little more quiet? So for the recording, or she said a lot of times what she'll hear is a clicking clock. And she said, then you just unplug the clock or you move the clock to another room. So that's something to pay attention to. One that I've seen is a light source. It is good to have a light source in front of the person. And example here, we had one interview here. She interviewed her grandfather in his RV. So the main light is behind him and it shadows him. Do a practice with your equipment. Practice before you get there to make sure you know how to use the equipment. And also do a practice run there at the interview site with the person that you're going to be doing the interview with. Then play back that practice practice part to make sure that everything you could hear both people speaking. Was there unwanted noise actually being picked up? Does the lighting need to be adjusted? So like with this image here, if they would have looked at it, they would realize, oh, grandpa's blacked out. The other thing is she had the recording device pointed at grandpa and her questions are not picked up. And so we cannot hear her questions in the interview. We can hear his answers, which are the important part, but I really wish we also had her questions. One of the interviews I did when I was at BYU, my wife had taken his wife, this was a German immigrant that I interviewed, took his wife into the other room and kept her busy. But you could hear their conversation just as well as you could hear at the conversation that was in the room. And that Sister Embry was saying that was going to be one bad thing with that interview because you could hear two conversations at one time. So that's why it's important to do a practice run to make sure that you're picking up these other issues that can be taking place that you can take care of before you actually do the actual interview. So now you're ready to actually do the interview with the person. Some of the key points to remember: let the person being interviewed lead the interview. We had one veteran that was interviewed that he was African American, and in this interview only took about 10 minutes. In the 10 minutes, he mentioned 6 times about discrimination that he felt in boot camp. He had a story to tell, and the student did not pick that up and did not ask further questions about it. And it was something that the veteran wanted to talk about. And if he would have picked up on that, he could have asked further questions and got the person talking about that experience and what was important for them to talk about. So remember, what you may think is important may not be what the person doing that you're interviewing thinks is important. This is their interview. This is a time for them to share their experiences. The person being interviewed should do most of the talking. Do not add your own story. And this is one thing in a practice run that we did at the Library of Congress last week. One of the things that was brought up is people were saying when they did their practice and the person would bring something up, they so badly wanted to say, oh yeah, I understand, I've had the same experience. And we were told not to do that. And that's something to be aware of, because so often we want to connect with the person that we're having a conversation with. And so that's one thing that we naturally do, but we don't want to take away from their story. This is their story. Use body language to show interest. Lean into it. One of the things that was brought up in the meeting is if they're really into the story, and she said that a lot of times they will look up as they are reliving that story, and it's like they've gone back into that. She said a great thing to continue that is to lean in and turn your ear to the person. And she says it's amazing, just that little gesture, how it strengthens a person to continue on with their story. Another thing she was saying is that it's good to do the nodding, but she said make sure that you do as a slow nod. Because a lot of times, if a person does real quick, oh yeah, what signal that's actually pushing on is that you're in a hurry and you're trying to rush them on. And that's not the signal that you want to give them. So she said consciously make sure that you slow down your body language so that you're not giving them the sign that you want them to rush. As I mentioned before, listen to the person being interviewed and ask questions about what they are talking about. And that's a good thing, to have that pad of paper next to you, that as they ask something that you want to know more about, then write that down. One interview that we had, the veteran was talking about being captured as prisoner of war, and he went from his plane going down to being in the prisoner of war camp. And so the student then said, well, I want to hear about the prisoner of war camp, but I would also like to learn more about what happened when your plane went down and how did you get captured? And he had a fantastic story from being captured to getting to the POW camp that would have totally been missed out. So that's how you want to make sure that you're going deeper with these questions. And that's where, if you've done a little bit of research, you have a little bit of knowledge as well that's going to help with that. One of the things that suggests is that you end it with, is there anything you would like to add? And this gives them an opportunity to go one step further and add something that you may have left out of the interview that they want to talk about. I know when I said that to my father-in-law, this was during one of the Iraq wars, and then he started comparing his experience in Japan with Iraq, and it was interesting to see that comparison. So some of the things that you could be involved with, you can do this on your own. One of the things with doing this on your own, find a way to preserve that recording. A cloud space that you can put this on, that you can share with family members, putting it on your YouTube, even if it's a closed YouTube channel that you have to invite people to watch and see. It could be, videos can't be uploaded to Family Search, but what a lot of people have done is they put interviews on YouTube and they put the link on Family Search for it. If it's an audio interview, you can do audio interviews on Family Search, and the Family Search Memories app actually has a recording where you can actually record with your phone and you'll automatically put them on. Some other projects that you can work on is the Veterans History Project. And I've mentioned that several times. StoryCorps, if you listen to NPR radio will have times that they'll play StoryCorps, and many of those have been also put onto YouTube. These started out with booths that you had to go to, like New York City, and take the person to a booth, and you can interview anybody. And then that interview was recorded. They could play it on NPR radio, but those interviews also went to the Library of Congress. Then they started having buses that would go around, and they were recording studios, and you could sign up for a time slot to go interview anybody you wanted in this recording studio. Then they came up with the app, and now you can download the StoryCorps app and you can record it using the app. They have the Great Thanksgiving Listen, that is a high school project of getting high schoolers over Thanksgiving to interview an older family member and record that for the StoryCorps project. So that's a possibility. Check with state and local archives. As I mentioned, here at St. Tammany Parish Library, we're collecting interviews about the pandemic. We're also participants in the Veterans History Project. The Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library, which is a major archive for the state of Illinois, has many different oral history projects that they're working on. Check with your religious organizations. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are collecting oral histories of their members. And as I mentioned, the Family Search Memories app. Download that on your phone. They're short clips, about 5-10 minutes long, but that's something that a person could do easily in short moments. You go visit grandma and grandpa, sit down and do a short interview with them. So those are some items that you can participate in. One of the things, though, that has been brought up is to make sure that you have a way that you're going to archive it. I did record my grandparents, my grandmother. I have no idea where those cassette tapes are. And that's one of the things that when I did a session for Who's Tech, that many people brought up, that they did recordings, but they have no idea where those recordings are now. So make sure they're archived. And one thing that I've realized with genealogy, not only interviews, but all my paperwork, either they go up on Family Search into Memories, or I have put together books of the papers I've found, and I've given to all my cousins. Same thing with the interviews. Make sure that you record those and give copies to other people, so that there's more than one copy out there. So that way then it doesn't get lost and can be used, viewed later on. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open up for questions.
Abe White in the question and answer portion says, great ideas, thank you so much, I feel motivated. And Cassandra asks ideas for questions for veterans.
Yeah, do a search for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress, and they have a list of sample questions on their website. They also have a packet that you can print out, or you can request from the Library of Congress, and they'll send you the packet. And in there is a list of sample questions as well. But really, one thing with the veterans, a lot of it comes from them filling out that background sheet, the data sheet, that you'll find out what battles they were in, what medals they received, what service they served in, what positions they were, what equipment they used. And then you can do research on the certain helicopter or plane. You could do research about a certain battle. And then as you do research about that, then you can come up with questions that have to do specifically with what they've experienced. So we do have one person here that asks about a couple of questions for non-veterans.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so if you're interviewing a family member, what were some things that you enjoyed in your childhood? What was childhood like for you? What were some things that you liked to do outside? What were some games that you played? What was school like? How did you meet your wife? What were some things that you did together before you were married? What was your wedding like? What was life like? What job did you have? What types of things did you do for your job? What were some family activities you had? And then just, yeah, ask questions. It helps lead them through their life. And then when they really get excited about something, that's a good time then when you could ask further questions about something that they really want to talk about. Well, thanks everyone for coming out, and hope you get involved in recording these interviews. And if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I'm willing to help in any way that I can help you out, even if it's giving suggestions or looking over some of the questions that you may have if you want further ideas. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar, which is on Thursday, August 4th with James Tanner. He will be giving a presentation entitled Using Your Smartphone for Genealogy, an Update. A recording of this webinar will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.